state, citizens, stakeholders. Today is our Election Watch update, which will be a press briefing around our electoral reform agenda. Now, a core pillar of our 2022 citizen agenda is the need for citizens to act for change. And the most urgent action we are seized with is the need to register to vote for change. We all have to play our part. And by virtue of being a citizen, you're a member of this great movement, the Citizens Coalition for Change. Our collective task is to focus on the daily struggles that Zimbabweans face, then organize for change. We need to register to vote for the change we wish to see. The mass suffering of the Zimbabwean people is the biggest sign that we can't afford another disputed election. Disputed elections, the research tells us, as do our experiences, perpetuate the suffering of the people. 49% of Zimbabweans live in extreme poverty. Our hyperinflation rate is the highest in the world. We face an unprecedented cost of living crisis, which we experience every single time we walk into a supermarket. We're faced with chronic wage erosion. Our salaries no longer make sense. We also have another hunger crisis looming. Teachers are underpaid. Parents cannot afford examination fees. Our hospitals are dilapidated. Health workers are leaving the country in their droves. Our teachers are not earning enough. And we stand in solidarity with every single Zimbabwean who is suffering. But the time has come for Zimbabweans to stand shoulder to shoulder in a collective demand for a brighter future where the government champions the cause of the people and puts citizens at the center of all decision-making. You and I have a job to do. We must act because politics is about the people and we have to reclaim it as such. Now we have a special appeal to the young people. This is not to lecture about the doom and gloom of the future. The world has had enough of that. Instead, I want to appeal to you to get involved in the future of Zimbabwe. We simply have to register to vote. Our time has come and is quickly going, but you hold the future of this nation in your hands. Don't imagine yourself outside Zimbabwe. Your drive should be to be the change. We need you. And so as you're going to hear from our elections department today, we need to reform the electoral playing field. And as we've stated time and again, there are 7 demands that we make. The first is that there be full implementation of the right to vote. The second is the demand for a credible voters' roll. The third is a credible and real-time results management system. The fourth is the demand for integrity from ZEC, their processes, their personnel, and the polling material that's procured. The fifth is a demand for access to state media reform, and political freedoms. The sixth is the demand for security of the vote. And then the last demand is around the security of the voter. It's no secret that as we approach 2023, the electoral playing field has been nothing but free and fair. A number of our leaders are currently jailed without trial in the country's maximum security prison. We're all aware of what's taking place to 2 of our legislators, Honorable Job Sikala and Honorable Godfrey Sitole, as well as about 13 members from Nyatsime. It's clear that the regime is in panic mode. They're afraid of the citizens. They know that they cannot win a free and fair election, which is why they continue to persecute our members. Now, without further ado, I'm going to defer proceedings to Mr. Ian Makone, Councillor Ian Makone, who's going to speak a little bit about the electoral landscape, especially the reform agenda which we've been championing, and then we'll take a few questions from you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Good morning, afternoon. I feel out of place because the age range is 10. But it goes to show that this struggle is real. And all my age group should be doing is to sit as advisors. However, good day. This is the current of our series of Election Watch, where we like to interact with the press and exchange views, hear what you have to say, and hear what we have to say as well. Today, I shall spend a little bit of time talking about the document that we have submitted to SEC on election manipulation. And then I shall talk about the delimitation voters roll, because we're in the throes of the redrawing of constituency boundaries, which is a constitutional requirement every 12 years. And in it is the whole question of the voters roll inspection. Fazai has already talked about the need for voter registration, but I'll make a brief reference to that as well. And then delve a little bit into territory that is not mine, which is the political environment, to the extent that it affects the elections. You've already been sensitized on the need for reforms, electoral reforms. We will not rest until that has sunk into those that are supposed to do something about it. So now, we heard from ZEC a while ago that they challenged anyone with grievances on the manner in which they are managing elections, and that we should bring those to the fore. I can now advise you that we submitted a dossier to ZEC, and through our information or communications, it will be made available now that ZEC has had sight of it. I can also advise you that we've had a response from ZEC to that dossier, because we asked for an engagement with them. And the response was they would only engage with us under the auspices of the multi-party liaison committee. There's no objection to attending multi-party liaison committees. We do. But these are issues that any stakeholder, if they so wish, should raise with ZEC, and ZEC is duty-bound to respond to them directly on a bilateral basis. So we'll continue to press them for that direct interaction. But it doesn't bode well, and it doesn't give a good feeling about the relations between a public institution and a key stakeholder who they are supposed to listen to. We have been through the delimitation, and ZEC is advised that at the end of the inspection period, 5.8 million people had registered. That voters roll was 0.96% accurate. Now, anyone who is familiar with numbers should be very, very worried, because 1% of 5.8 million error is a huge figure. It will make or break a political party. whichever it may be. So far from being proud in making that announcement, we call on ZEC to look at that voters' roll much more closely, identify those errors, because there are a large number of people we keep hearing who turned up for voter inspection and their name just wasn't on, and yet they voted in 2018. So clearly something is not right. And if 50% of ZEC's figures of the registered voters turned out to inspect their names, that means there's another 50% who did not and who are therefore exposed to this level of error. I want to continue calling it an error, and that it is not deliberate. I hope it's not deliberate. We call on ZEC to address this particular anomaly as soon as possible, certainly before the next election. Because if they don't, those are the seeds for election petitions, etc., by whoever feels aggrieved, including ourselves. Then they said that they registered between January and June this year a total of 226,000 people. 226,000 people out of a potential 2 million. Anyone with basic statistics knowledge, out of the recently released population census, will be able to determine that the potential number of new registrants should have been in the region of 2 million. Even on their own recognition, ZEC had hoped to register 1 million people. The Ministry of Home Affairs had hoped to issue 2 million IDs. So clearly, for a public body, this is part of their core business. And we call on ZEC to look at it again. Part of the challenge that they've caused upon themselves is that we told them already that the ID program and the voter registration program must go in tandem, almost a one-stop shop. Instead of which, after ignoring, they went ahead with voter registration. The IDs followed. So it means that the same person who's taken the trouble to go to take out an ID must come back if they've got any hope at all of registering and therefore voting in 2023. So clearly, and I've spent a bit more time on this aspect, because on it hinges the potential disenfranchisement of a significant part of our population, and in particular, people of your age group. So when Fadzai is saying that this is your struggle, that's what it means. It is your compatriots, it's your demographic grouping that is denied the opportunity to register. When you look at the statistics published by ZEC themselves of people that voted from January to June, there's a telling story. In January, the statistics show a very low figure. In February, there was a bump. In March, a drop. In April, a bump. So even taking into account the inconsistencies that I've highlighted, it is clear that as a voter registration blitz invites a response from the target group. February, we had a blitz, a bump April was a blip, a bump. So we're saying to Zach, and I hope we all collectively make that same point, that we require them to institute a further voter registration blitz. There's been no more than just a vague intimation that we may consider. No, we want to go beyond, we may consider. We want to go beyond to a stage where there's a commitment on when that blitz is going to be. There's a commitment with over the voter education that must go through that process. Because if we don't, I worry that this generation, which is your generation, will not be party to the decision making that takes place next year at the polls. Political environment, I don't intend to spend more time, it's already been covered, where obviously we share the anguish of the families whose members are incarcerated. And the question you ask is, what is this incarceration intended to mean? Is it because they've done anything wrong? Because if they've done anything wrong, they would have been tried and sentenced, etc., etc. They haven't. It is to make them suffer until they cry murder. But I don't think it could happen. It creates a further determination on the part of all these people that are being victimized. It makes them stronger, it makes them want to stick to their political views. So the message therefore we're putting across is, please, just do the right thing and give each person the right to express themselves. Electoral reforms have already been covered, but I think for what it's worth, it's important that we continue to emphasize what they are, the 7 key demands which Fadzai has already mentioned. The right to vote. That includes people in the diaspora make no apologies. You cannot insist on taxing them because they're paying tax, but without representation. The diaspora remittances are the 2nd largest source of foreign currency for our country. We poo-poo them. A credible voters' roll, we've already discussed. Real-time, incredible results management, we're going to be coming back to that issue in future submissions, but it's important. There is no integrity in the production of voting materials. And we want to be, as the stakeholders, we want to be part of that process. We want to be consulted. We want a transparent system, and it is not there. He's talked about freedoms, so she's talked about freedoms, she's talked about security of the vote and security of the voter. In conclusion, in our next chat, we're going to focus on the ID program, because we've heard some very worrying things in the manner that this is being implemented. Not just in urban areas, but also in rural areas. And it's a worry, and we're going to have proof on what is happening. Let me thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. It is very understandable for young people in the rural areas not bothering to try if they have to make multiple trips to the district office, first to get a photograph taken, and then secondly, hopefully to collect the ID. This is happening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, before I open the floor up to questions, I just want to make 2 quick points which flow from what Councillor Makone has said. The first relates to the narrative that's continuously sponsored by Zanu-PF to the effect that elections don't work, voting doesn't work. Now, Zanu-PF would not invest so much infrastructure, energy and resources into the electoral process if voting didn't work. We want to emphasize to all the citizens, to young people, to professionals, to people in urban areas, people in rural areas, elections work. And if there's ever been a need for Zimbabweans to come together, it's now, because our change depends on it. We cannot afford a further 5 years of the same. The second issue I want to relate to is in respect of the fact that we are winning by elections. We are. And that's something that I'm sure Mr. Makone is profoundly aware of. The citizens are aware of it. But I want to emphasize that we're winning despite the odds. We're winning despite the odds, but that doesn't make us blind to the odds. The kind of margins of error which have been spoken about will make a huge difference come the harmonized election. So the fact that we are winning elections is not going to stop us from demanding electoral reforms. Those electoral reforms are necessary. And if anything, the by-election process for us, the reason we are participating is because they're a dry run to see the efficacy, the readiness of ZEC. To test whether they pass the integrity test, the constitutionality test, the transparency test. And as the dossier that we submitted indicates, they're failing on a number of fronts. Citizens themselves will have gone to polling stations during the by-elections and found their names not there. You'll see a husband, their name is in the voters' roll, and yet the wife is being posted somewhere else. The presiding officer says, well, just go and check. Kunemamuma polling station to check if your name is there. That's simply not acceptable, which is why we insist on a credible voters' roll. On the political environment, we complain consistently about the vote buying by Zanu-PF. It's unacceptable that in Kariba there are 5 known bases where people were being given cash, $5, $10, $25. That cannot be allowed to continue. It's known in various constituencies, in various wards, that Zanu-PF has been dishing out, handouts to citizens who can demonstrate that they voted for Zanu-PF through a photo of a ballot slip. We also have the issue of traditional leaders who are captured by Zanu-PF. People are told, that assisted voter crisis is creating huge problems for us, and we've drawn this to the attention of ZEC. You can't have a situation where people are told you're going to be followed, you're going to be accompanied in the polling station, so that people check where you voted. That detracts completely from the need for security of the vote and privacy of the vote. So when all is said and done, we continue to insist that if we don't resolve these issues, we're going to have another disputed election like the one we had in 2018. And the aftermath of that election tells a big story. Just the other day, we were commemorating the 1st of August shootings that took place by the military. That's the sort of response that comes from the citizenry themselves. It's not driven by political actors. When people are dissatisfied with the manner in which the election is run. So everything we're talking about now and the pressure we're mounting in good time is to ensure that we don't have that again. And we do want to reassure the citizens that we have lobbied and we continue to lobby both SADC and the African Union on these issues. There's need for long-term monitoring of our electoral playing field. There's no point just coming on the night before election day to try and assess whether the voting environment is free and fair, when throughout the year preceding the election, our members have been incarcerated, they've been shot, they've been abducted, they've been persecuted on a number of fronts. That simply does not cut it and does not meet the test of a transparent, free, fair, verifiable election set out in the Constitution. So without further ado, I obviously acknowledge that one of our other point persons on elections is here. Ms. Ellen Shiriedenga, I'm just going to ask her to come to the front, and then she's also going to help us when we deal with any feedback and questions we'll get from members of the media. Please feel free, as usual, to raise your hand, indicate which media house you're from, and kindly limit yourselves, at least at first, to one question each so we can cover a number of questions. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm Kudzai from TechMac TV.
Thank
Now,
you,
recently there were reports that Chief Ngelere was saying that people should only vote for Zanu-PF. You as a party, what are you doing about it? Because we have a lot of chiefs who are dabbling in partisan politics.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Ms. Julia Binga to address that one.
Well, thank you for that question. I think this is one of the key reform areas that we're talking about. Our constitution as a country is very clear on the role of traditional leaders in political affairs, and also that they should be non-partisan. And we are all aware that there's a high court, judgment to that effect. So really those are some of the issues that we're highlighting. And if you might be aware, the document that the dossier was sent to ZEC just recently, it does mention the issue of the traditional leader. And this is one area of dialogue, which we want to talk to ZEC about, to Parliament about, to the state about, and even to the traditional leadership, system in the country. Those are some of the issues that we want to talk about. And definitely, we will make sure that we get ready before we get to the elections in 2027.
And in fact, one of the big issues, you will be aware that we're conducting a mass mobilization program in rural areas in all the provinces of the country. And that's something, that's the feedback we're getting from citizens, that we're being pressured by traditional leaders to vote a certain way. We're being forced to be assisted during the voting process. But what you'll actually find is that the rural voters are not as impressionable as society would like to believe, or as the traditional leaders themselves would like to believe. They know that the suffering they're facing is suffering that will continue if they don't vote for change. Unfortunately, the crisis in Zimbabwe doesn't discriminate. When you go into the store and you cannot afford bread, you cannot afford mealie meal, you cannot afford cooking oil, it doesn't matter whether you support the CCC or Zanu-PF, everybody is suffering. And it's even worse in the rural areas because we've had a drought, there's a looming food crisis as well. So those citizens are awake, and we're constantly conscientizing them and deliberately creating strategies to ensure that they're safe come voting day. And I think we employed a number of those strategies, for example, in Chipinge, to ensure that a citizen is allowed to vote, to ensure that our polling agents are on the ready to identify traditional leaders who on voting day are intimidating citizens. So it's not as though we're sitting back and complaining, sitting back and feeling sorry for ourselves. We do have strategies in place, but that does not take away from the constitutional obligation of ZEC to monitor these events, to ensure that all parties comply with the code of conduct, and to ensure that they don't stray in that regard. You'll be aware of what happened. There's that video of a rural meeting taking place, people saying, no, Chamisa ngauraiwe, vangechuku singavauraiwe. All those things, that should be alert. You can't have the police conducting a month-long investigation when there's evidence that's clear as day that Zanu-PF is doing the wrong thing. So we are pushing that traditional leaders thing. It's top of mind in our reform agenda. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. My name is Peshi Mashira, I'm a freelance. My question is, since we are 12 months before the next general elections, do you as a party have a candidate selection policy, or we are just going to see those who've been in parliament for the past 20 years coming back again? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Peshi, for that excellent question. And now, President Nelson Chamisa is on record, our chain champion-in-chief, saying that our candidate selection process in 2023, or for the 2023 elections, is going to be a complete departure from the past. All candidates, all, are going to be selected by the communities they wish to represent. We're going to obviously unveil, when we closer to the time of our launch, the process by which this should be done. What we implore to the citizens is plug in to the community candidate selection process. It's no longer business as usual where a candidate is foisted upon a particular community. People are going to choose for themselves. And people are going to lead in terms of the criteria. We are doing consultations. People insist on a person who lives in the community, a person who's active in the community, a person who's got integrity, a person who's competent, a person who believes in the transformation agenda. So all these things are going to be criteria that we're going to use, but the citizens are going to be at the forefront of deciding, because the key guiding philosophy or ideology or North Star of the CCC is that citizens should be at the center of all decisions that are made. And so the parliament you'll see in 2023 following the election is going to be a parliament that you select, and this starts from the movement candidate selection process itself. So let's all plug in. You don't wait until voting day in 2023 to participate. We're going to roll out both a volunteer program and this community candidate selection program to ensure that you decide who you want to represent you. Are there any further questions? We know there's certain journalists who've got a habit of then following us afterwards. Now is the time to ask. Where? Yes. There's a hand up. Yes, Marsh.
You emphasized earlier on that you're going to write to SADC in AU concerning electoral reforms.
That we have actually started engaging both SADC and the African Union.
In the previous election, AU and SADC put that on the stomach to actually impose, or rather corner Zanu-PF government to implement electoral reforms. And in this scenario, if they don't actually implement electoral reforms, are you going to put the election without electoral reforms?
So I must emphasize, dealing specifically with the last part of your question, I'll come to the earlier part shortly. Voting is a constitutional imperative. Nobody has the right to take the right to vote away from any citizen. Citizens deserve to choose their leaders. They have the right to choose who represents them in council, in parliament, and at presidential level. It's citizens who choose. And that's why the will of the people is a sacrosanct principle of any constitutional democracy. And so nobody, Zanu-PF cannot take away people's right to vote. Coming specifically now to SADC and the AU. Now obviously we have sharpened our approach significantly since the 2018 election. We took very important lessons, and even with these by-elections. And so this has informed our engagement with the international community, particularly regional bodies, around the electoral process that's going to take place in Zimbabwe. You'll note that there's been a shift in approach by the region when it comes to elections. We saw the work that SADC did in Zambia, the work that they did in Malawi, the work that they continue to do in other jurisdictions. And so we're ensuring that we have a dossier of information that we give to them so that they're prepared and know from the get-go what's taking place in Zimbabwe. And all these facts are objectively verifiable. It's no secret. The torture that's taking place, the weaponization of the legal system, the court system, the abuse by Zanu-PF of the police service, all these things are being placed on record so that we ensure that there's no disputed election come 2023. Now, this is not just urgent domestically, it's also urgent for other regional actors, other countries. The forced migration crisis in Zimbabwe started to create domestic crises in other jurisdictions, call it South Africa, call it Botswana, call it Zambia, wherever it is. So many of our citizens, and I think that the data tells us beyond 3 million, are forced to migrate because of the governance crisis, because of the economic crisis, because of the failure by Zanu-PF to rule us competently and constitutionally. And so they can see that the pressure is upon them as well. It's in everybody's interest that there's no disputed election in 2023. And so we really are focused on that as we engage our regional bodies. Thank you. Yes, sir?
Desmond Munemo for Zimbabwe. So my question is, prior to the elections, you've noted a number of concerns, concerns about ZEC issues, especially in ZEC. We know reportedly there are relatives of some PF members, the Moadi and stuff. Are you going into elections? Are you going to participate in elections despite those election irregularities and voter apathy? We are talking about a lack of level playing field. Are you really going into elections trusting those issues are still at hand? And that has been happening for over the election period for the past years. So what's your take on that? Are you still going to participate, or are there any measures are you going to take to counter a flawed election?
Thank you so much, Desmond. Now, it's in everybody's interest, every single citizen, and this goes across the board, all political parties, even those who say they're just, citizens and they don't align with anyone, and even international actors, including SADC countries and countries within the AU, to ensure that there's no disputed election in 2023. The crisis, as I've indicated, will spill over and affect everybody if we don't have a free and fair election. And so there has to be a national consensus. And one of the things maybe that the Elections Directorate didn't mention is that we are in the process of drafting, in fact, it's in its finalization stage, a pre-election pact. There has to be a consensus amongst all citizens, all political actors around what will constitute a free and fair election. And in this regard, we don't want to focus on personalities, we want to focus on the process. What is the process that's being used to come up with a ZEC commissioner? Is it a credible process? Is this a transparent process? Does it meet the competency test? Does it meet the independence test? Does it meet the integrity test? All of those things are important, and they have to be agreed prior to the election in 2023. If there's failure to agree, the outcome will be a disputed election, which doesn't work in anybody's favor. Like I've emphasized, nobody can take away the right to vote from a citizen, which is why it's the number one agenda item in our electoral reform agenda. The right to vote is constitutionally enshrined. It's set out in Section 67, and in Section 155 of the Constitution, the law is very clear that the only two qualifiers for a citizen to be able to vote is that obviously they're a citizen of Zimbabwe and that they're above 18. Their location should not matter. That they may be a convict should not matter. So it doesn't matter if someone is in the diaspora, if someone is in prison, they should be allowed to vote. And it should not be an impediment that someone cannot access an ID card. And one of the things that's contained in our dossier to ZEC is this clear urban vote suppression approach by ZEC. When it suits Zanu-PF, you see ZEC working night and day to ensure citizens are registered in areas which they believe they're strong, for example, rural areas and certain communities they think that are Zanu-PF strongholds. And yet you come to Harare, you go to Bulawayo, there's a lackluster approach, even when we've decidedly mobilized hundreds of citizens, young people to go and vote, they get there. When they see there's a long queue, they say, oh no, machine wafa. You get there, they're told no, Magetse Ayende. Here in town in Cecil House, you'll be shocked at how many days of the week the ZEC office is simply not working. That won't cut it as we approach 2023, and we're going to use all tools available to us. Peaceful, of course, constitutional, of course, to ensure that people's right to vote is respected. No further questions? Don't want to shut anyone out. But on that note, like I said, I cannot beg young people enough. We have to go and register to vote. You know, the Zimbabwe that we're going to see in the next 5 years and the next 10 years depends on this voting decision that we have to make now. And this is not a struggle that we can outsource to anybody. And it's not about blaming anyone, but it's about our collective future. So we implore parents, pastors, teachers, work professionals, mentors, please, let's speak to our young. Let's encourage them to vote. Let's reinforce the message that voting works. Trust me, it does. It makes all the difference. But even beyond that, we have to participate to ensure that we're part of the change we want to see. Don't sit back and outsource your struggle to Ellen or Ian. Make sure you get involved. Like I said, we're just about to roll out a wide-ranging volunteer program, so there'll be space for everybody to get involved, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a creative, whether you're a doctor, whether you're an accountant, acting for change, whether you're an artist, a musician. There's space for everyone. Let's make this the biggest election that they've seen in the region. President Chamisa has already emphasized that the campaign that we're going to run for 2023 is going to be the biggest, the brightest. It's going to be a fall campaign. We're going to continue to inspire hope, a thirst for change, emphasizing hope, accountability, and development so that we can build a Zimbabwe that we can all be proud of. So I re-emphasize, I can't emphasize enough, let's all register to vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.